Welcome to the Peacebuilding podcast. Join host Susan Coleman as she interviews today's most creative, courageous, and sometimes outrageous mediators, coaches, entrepreneurs, and out-of-the-box thinkers whose work, whether intended or not, is building peace. Tune in for 45 minutes of pure inspiration as we explore the best stories, the best practices, the best ideas of a new world emerging. Here's your host, global consultant, coach, facilitator, and mediator, Susan Coleman.
Naghmeh, hello. This is Susan. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. Hi, Susan. It's lovely to be here with you.
It's lovely to see you. I don't see you very often. And how are those beautiful kiddos of yours faring?
Oh, yes. They are growing up. It's definitely fascinating to see.
One of them I have a special attachment to because I knew him when he was just a little being inside you when we were in Gabon together.
Yes, exactly.
And we had to negotiate the authorities about making sure that you didn't take you not have to take a yellow fever shot. So,
exactly. Yeah, it's amazing, huh?
Yeah.
That's right.
And how old is he now?
4.5.
4.5.
Nice. My goodness.
I know, it really does.
It's amazing.
So I have with me Naghmeh Sobhani, and I'm just going to give you a few excerpts from an amazing bio. And so let me just do that. And so Naghmeh is a post-conflict peace-building, collaborative negotiation, and education for peace-building consultant with expertise in developing and monitoring large-scale initiatives, especially within fragile, divided zones, as well as training and facilitation, participatory inclusive processes, involving disputing groups. Ms. Sobhani's insight into the field of peace building began as director of a humanitarian nonprofit organization, Education for Peace Institute of the Balkans, based in Sarajevo. In this capacity, she has 12 years of leadership and organizational experience in the development and rollout of an education for peace-building intervention, namely Education for Peace, in a divided post-conflict society in Bosnia and Herzegovina, mainly. And then a few other things. I mean, it's a long, rich bio, which of course I'm going to post on our website. But some of the organizations Naghmeh's worked for have been UNDP Crimea, Oxfam, UNESCO, Northern Ireland, and Win Peace Greece. She's worked as a trainer in collaborative negotiation for the UN Secretariat. She's also has a big job as an ongoing peace-building consultant for UNICEF's Division for Humanitarian Action and Transition. She was selected as part of a team of 3 experts responsible to design the organization's conflict sensitivity and peace-building capacity development program to be launched globally. Education, she has a master's in leadership and management with a minor in consultation and conflict resolution at Landeg International University in Switzerland. She also is a coactive CTI coach. She's been trained in principle-based negotiation from the Harvard Negotiation Project. And she's in the process of writing her doctoral dissertation, lucky her, on her work in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She's a born citizen of Burkina Faso, West Africa, and she's originally from Iran. And now I believe you live with your husband and 2 children in Brussels.
Exactly.
That's right. Is that where we're finding you today?
Absolutely. As of today, yes.
As of today, yes. Another globetrotter that we have here.
Exactly.
So I think you're probably going to fill out that bio as we talk, but is there anything that particularly you want to mention as we get going?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. It's not. I mean, I think it's really a privilege to have the opportunity, on the one hand, to really be so intimately with the field, engaged in the process of peace building, and it's the programming angles of it, and how it interacts with the human dimension, and on the other hand, to just be able to have a space with colleagues in the international community to understand how do we go about interventions in such a way that we don't put aside the human dimension, especially in fragile zones and conflict zones. So it's these two different areas that really allows you to be in a very privileged space to engage in the field, I guess, of peace building.
Right. As we get underway too, I've been discovering, in my new role here as interviewer, that I also like to know, what just if you could, what are the things that are most important that you want to talk about in the 45 minutes that we have? I mean, we're not exactly limited to that, but we more or less are. So, just if you could name them, so I can, because I of course have my own things I want to ask you, but. If you just kind of give them topic headings or something, that would be good. Or maybe there's just one main thing you really want to be talking about.
I think it's interesting. Maybe for me, just I'm sure you have a good little bucket. But there's one thing that for me is always fascinating, and that is allowing the discourse around the conflict discourse to really infuse with precision, a very strong space for how, when we talk about constructive outcomes from conflict context, what is it that allows that outcome to happen? And for me, this is where the whole peace building work comes into play, because it is when we do have outcomes that are creative and constructive, it is because there's a new paradigm, or there's a shift in understanding, or there's new capacity that's developed around, and there's a new understanding that we are not only are we can go from a perception of incompatibility to the possibility that maybe we need to be able to engage with one another. So for me, really, the conflict discourse to really place and situate the whole discussion about the dynamics of peace building that is really at the heart of going towards a constructive outcome.
So what are the ingredients that really make that happen? And also, I guess I'm also going to be interested in what gets in the way.
Right.
What's been your experience? Because I think the listeners will really be interested in both what's working and what seems to be challenges that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. So it doesn't just happen suddenly that things become constructive. There is some hard, there's a whole process that gives way to that outcome, that needs to be, it needs to be given weight, and needs to be understood for us to, to go into a new phase of engagement as individuals that come together with diverse backgrounds and really from unjust from an unjust place to a place where there is reconciliation, right? So there's a whole wave of things. So I think that's all of us in peace building. That's what we're trying to
Right. Okay, well, that's cool. So, one thing I wanted to start with, because it was so interesting, you and I really got to know each other in Gabon when we were doing some work for the UN. We were doing one of those kind of conflict interventions that was really, really interesting and multi-layered. We were working with the leaders, a variety of leaders, a whole group. That there was a little bit of a mutiny going on, and we were using coaching, we were using group facilitation, we were using training, and you, of course, half of our group was French speaking and half of our group was English speaking, and you were having to deal with all the translation because you grew up in Burkina Faso. I think that's where you really started speaking French.
Absolutely. Yes.
And you have and you also were able to really connect to people, because we were in West Africa. So the whole West African culture was, very familiar to you. And so it makes me want to ask you, a little bit about that rich background that you have, and maybe a little bit about, what you see as the seeds that were planted somewhere, wherever they were planted in you, that ended up blossoming in the form of you working in the field of peace building.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I remember when I was, I don't know how old I was, but let's say 7. I'm not exactly sure. And I was with my father. We were living in Ouagadougou. I was actually born in Ouagadougou. And funny enough, actually, I didn't know at that time, but later on, as I was growing up, we come from a minority in Iran that was persecuted very systematically. And one of the ways in which you persecute is that you actually don't give a community a right to be. So, or you don't allow them to leave the country, or if they're away from the country, you basically take away their identity. So in this case, when we were in Ouagadougou, and at that time, actually, my father was working for the United Nations. So he goes to, after the revolution, in 82 or so, he went to, because his passport was expired, he goes to the embassy to just renew his passport. And they took the passport but never gave it back to him.
This is the Iranian embassy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they never gave it back to him. So overnight, we became without anything, And the same thing with my father had his mother, my grandmother, had his 4 sisters, so on. So it's interesting just to see the way in which
it gives me chills. I mean, that's never been my experience to be suddenly contained. Yeah. I mean, in that way where I can't leave, or I'm being...
just to see how do you respond to that, and the resilience of the human being and the human spirit to not only move forward, but yet to say this is the challenge that we face in injustices, and that the point here is to really do an extra effort to actually serve humanity and really and truly do your part. And of course, in this context, my father was very much engaged, and my mother in work, development work on the ground. But I do remember one trip that really struck with me when I was going to a village with my father. And as we were going...
This is in Burkina Faso at this point?
In Burkina Faso, yeah. And so
you have to tell us how you got there, though. Because I'm still with you in Iran, and he doesn't have a passport. So how did he get out?
But this was in Burkina Faso. So you see, he went to the embassy. Yeah.
I see, okay.
And so if you were in the country, in Iran, you just were not given any paper to step out. But if you were out of the country, what it meant was that you were stripped of your...
Gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
Your, any paper that suggested your, origin and so on. So they actually took away his passport and never gave it back to him. So we became without a country in Ouagadougou. And because I was born in Ouagadougou, my brother was born in Ouagadougou, we actually had a right to be Burkinabe. So it's interesting. So that's really my reality began in Burkina Faso, right? Although we spoke Persian. So now we're still in Burkina Faso, and this is on this trip just to see how things impact a child. So as we were traveling, in one of the villages, so he turned to me and he said, "You see that piece of, it was like a rusted kind of machinery, some sort of machinery that's agricultural machinery." And so he was an agricultural engineer. But he said, "You see that piece of rusted thing over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know why it's over there? It's because we didn't go about talking to the people in the village to understand how and consult with them to see how to find a solution to a problem. Because we didn't, we bring in an idea and we just throw it on them, and then it's left just like this."
That's a little microcosm of a lot of development initiatives, isn't it?
Yes, exactly, at that time. So this is early 1980s, right?
Right.
And he says, because you cannot go somewhere and start something in the name of helping, but not engage with people from that village that know best what needs to happen. You bring in knowledge together to be able to come up with solutions, and not in isolation of the people on the ground and their voices. And I actually really remember that conversation. It was very interesting. And so the idea that no matter what you do, the approach you take in the process itself, which is the human dimension, engaging people in the consultative process, in order to have any kind of effectiveness, right? So this was actually, I think, my first kind of the little spark that happened on the one hand, just practically speaking, on in this one
Yeah,
particular.
a great teaching at the age of 7, when of
Yeah.
course kids
Yeah.
are suddenly really at a
Yeah.
very different developmental moment. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And on the other hand, this later on in my life, being aware of the fact that what had happened and the way my parents dealt with it in such an incredible way, in a resilient way, and when what could have been something that breaks you apart, that you suddenly became without a country and so on, and you can be bitter. And I mean, there's so many opportunities there, but instead you bounce back and you really turn to doing everything you can to serve, to do things better. So,
Was your mother Iranian as well?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing, thank you, amazingly interesting story. And then can you give us a little bit of your sort of journey and that sort of the highlights of that journey that maybe have brought us to the place where you actually put peace building on your business card?
Yeah.
Because that's how long have you had peace building on your business card? How long has that been a title that you actually have claimed?
From 2000.
Okay.
So it's 15 years.
Okay. And at that time, that wasn't that common, right, to put on your business card?
No.
Yeah, I think of you as being one of the first, really, to be doing it.
Even the. It's interesting because I remember at that time when you talked about peace or peace building, there's a little bit of an allergy to the concept, honestly. And it's interesting because at that time I was already in the field, and for me, my first interaction with peace building was the fact that I was faced with the aftermath of the war in Bosnia Herzegovina, and what the aftermath of it was actually quite profoundly, really, it was, the division was really consolidated in the fact that my initial the mandate that I was a part of in a pilot initiative in the education sector was meant to be like a tiny pilot that was to engage with, at that time, with school environments, and make communities that come out of the school environment, and try to look at the three communities: the Serb, the Croat, and the Bosniak communities within Bosnia-Herzegovina. And at that time, quickly realizing that this country has less than 4 million people, but there were 13 ministers of education in this country of less than 4 million, because it was so divided that and how did they make up those 13? It just, when there was an enclave of one area with a certain group and then the other, it just somehow, it ended up being, having that as a structure. And these 13 ministers didn't necessarily come together to agree on anything. They had autonomy over their own area. And so at that moment, for me, I realized to what extent, and I remember these conversations where we said, you can build as many buildings as you want, but it will come right back down unless you give attention to the mind and the heart. And where the laws that govern relationships have been so profoundly bruised and destroyed, before these are addressed, before these fundamental assumptions, that lives in the mind and the heart about the other. So there's this dichotomy about us and them. If you don't, and you're not willing to just create spaces that are safe, spaces that allow a re-examination of these fundamental assumptions of that dehumanizes one group against the other, that then 100% feeds and informs the policies that are used, the actions or inactions, right? So, and the structures. So it starts from what's happening from within, and it feeds into both systems and structures and human interactions. So
Of course, as we know, everything starts inside these human brains of ours.
Exactly.
All of it, yeah.
And at that time, there was a lot of, I remember a lot of focus on rebuilding, right? So you needed to look at, at, at filling up all the bullet holes. So you can say, yay, we've done something. So it looks like we've taken care of what looks like continuous slaughtering. I mean, it looked like a horrific space. So you physically want to build it back up. And so very little attention was put to this other aspect, which really is around the human dimension. But it's the human dimension and the peace building part of the human dimension, right?
Yeah,
so,
I actually, it's really recalling to when I was in Beirut. There was a huge. This was I don't know how many years ago, quite a while ago. Huge amount of construction going on, huge,
yeah.
and yet my experience of people was that they were kind of frozen emotionally,
Of course.
just frozen, and not really accessing. It kind of walled off, shut down.
It's
and
normal.
I thought, yeah.
And part of what I used to, I remember, because just to kind of give you a little bit quick thing, that it was for the first time since the war, the only mechanism that succeeded in bringing all the senior advisors, what I'm talking about is all the ministers, willing to be in the same room and actually being willing to take this initiative and take it to heart and send their entire staff for the first time since the war with full trust in a space. And I didn't know that this was the first time since the war, but someone said, by the way, this is the first time we're allowing this to happen because we trust this mechanism that you have.
Yeah.
And he says, because I know that what you go back to is the fundamental aspects of the human dimension around unity in the context of diversity, that you will cultivate and preserve the marriage of these two, right? That we're at the same time part of one society. At the same time, our uniqueness our unique identities is not disregarded, right? So, and naturally, and this is what I remember very clearly, because that when you're in a climate that is so divided and people's notions of their unique, diverse backgrounds, they feel that in the collective, it's going to be not only disregarded, but it's really, it's not safe. Then, of course, what happens is that you will get very nationalistic. Like you start wearing an armor, right? So I remember observers from the international community engaging in these settings that we would have with the ministers and their advisors and so on. They would kind of be shocked to say, I'm surprised at the language they're using and the interaction. But the point here is that you have to first set a climate between people so they feel that it's inclusive, and then you bring them together, and then you change the whole language that's used, and you go to the more subordinate kind of goals that are, in this case, you're dealing with the well-being of children, right, and so on. And then you ask for people to go to that place, and at the same time you say we will nurture and cultivate and ensure that your uniqueness is preserved in this collective. So it was and at the same time, I realized...
Let me interject for a second, because I was asking you about your journey, and I think you've been starting to tell me about it, and maybe because I just want to jump right into where you are,
Please.
and actually have you, because you sort of have done this already, but if you wouldn't mind, because it sounds like you're focusing in on a piece of work that you'd like to talk. Is that that's the work in Bosnia? Sounds like the work that. Or maybe I don't know. I don't want to. Yeah. But how would you define peace building? Just because I see different definitions out there. But what's that word mean to you?
So peace building for me, it's about engaging individuals, primary groups, right? Like that's at the core, and intergroups or intercommunities, systems and structures. So you have all of these different aspects in a creative and inclusive process, right? Whereby there is growth, right? And you reestablish you start reestablishing or establishing cohesive relationships, right? In the context of human diversity.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So that's for me the dimension. So it's not enough, especially so what I just said means a lot of different things, right? So it means in order to have those dimensions, and you need to be able to engage in a number of things. I mean, when on structural justice, I mean, there's so many aspects that play. There's
huge.
There's various elements that play out, but this is really the.
And immediately what comes to mind is just from a very practical point of view, what kind of contract you get. You know, who contracts with whom to do that kind of work. And you know, how do you get a mandate, and how do you get it going? Because that's enormous what you just described, and I'm gathering that is the kind of work you did in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Yeah, and I think this is where you know one thing that's interesting is that you cannot when you're engaging in these kind of climates that are so charged, you can engage one or the other and just random. You know, you really actually. If you really want to be effective, you need to be robust in the process that you're taking on. And you have to be able to look at the various aspects of the system. So from the individual, but the individual cannot stand alone. You have to be able to have individuals, not in one or two, in a more of a mass, right? So that because an individual alone, it requires so much courage to take on, you know, something. You have to also involve a community. You know, and so it depends on what sector, what you're dealing with. But you need to be able to have both primary groups and intergroup dynamics that are being addressed. So the individual is functioning in their primary group, and then they're engaging with each other. But you need to facilitate it, right?
So Naghmeh, that work sounds like that's work we can focus in on. Is that right? Yeah. So what were you contracted to do?
Mm-hmm. So well, initially, In the at the pilot phase, the idea was really just to have that interaction between individuals that were in the school environment. So individuals, you have the educator, you have the teacher, and then you have students, but not one or two. So it meant the entire school. So because the notion of a culture of peace it needs to be an inclusive process. So it's not everybody.
It's a little overwhelming. There's so many systems that you're talking about here that it's like, wow.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So you have the teacher, you have management, you have even the support staff that's engaged, and you have the classroom. So you have all subject areas, you have all classrooms, and then you have that same dynamic happening across the different communities. So because in this context in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it was actually quite divided. So you had one that was representing one community, one that was representing another community.
And these communities being Serbs, Croats,
and Bosniaks.
And Bosniaks. Yeah. It's all basically ethnically divided. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in some contexts maybe there was a slight representation of one, but it was minor. In other places not at all. And so in the initial mandate was to engage with a set of schools that were from these communities, with just with an okay from the ministry, right? So to actually have a open door to actually enter the school.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about the entire school. You were talking about everybody. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, this was intended to be a 1-year pilot. And so and we were a team in the pilot.
With the intention being, what was the?
With the intention being, to integrate into the learning process a conversation and an exploration of a culture of peace, but through the school, in the classroom.
Yeah.
So what it ended up being was that every subject area, not only was there a discussion about the subject, but there was also a reflection and discussion about a culture of peace.
Wow. So it's really integrated into the curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what it also then demanded, because at the beginning they said, but wait, because it was a very traditional mode of teaching at that time, they said, but there's no space for interaction and exploration in the classroom. So they said, you need to provide a pedagogical method as well. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it meant also bringing in diverse learning methods in an interactive process in the classroom to give way to a process-oriented learning mode.
Because as we know, process has a whole lot to do with the content.
Exactly.
And can certainly impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then
it's kind of it can be a meta pedagogy in a way that you actually are teaching about a culture of peace, and then you actually are acting it out in how you're engaging with the students in the classroom.
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So what started emerging from this was, on the one hand, addressing these worldview assumptions that children have developed in their minds about us and them and all these things, and trying to unpack that on the one hand. But then it also, Ministry of Education noted that this is actually impacting the way teaching happens in the classroom as well, on a more fundamental level as well. So, and then that's on one level. So it's in the classroom.
Can you give an example? Any examples come to mind?
So for example, like the classroom is no longer a traditional classroom where there's rote learning, where the teacher stands in front and you have to regurgitate information. There's no thinking, there's no creativity, there's no exploring of concepts. And so in a way, it completely changes that approach, 100%, because it says it's asking of the teacher to revisit the way they design their lessons.
Yeah.
To not only address a topic that is related to a culture of peace, but it's also has to do. It means that to explore, that means the teacher cannot just stand there and talk.
Yeah.
Kids have to be able to think reflectively.
It has to be experiential and participatory.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. You have to integrate those elements in. Yeah. So that's, in a way, so it evolved in this pilot. It started on the one hand in a classroom, but then there were these spaces where for students to confirm, to consolidate their understanding about a concept of a culture of peace, and how, let's say, the notion of unity and diversity, and let's say when you're talking about tiny little kids in primary school, they're looking at, they're learning about nature and the garden and flowers. Different flowers in a garden are beautiful. You basically give water to the same earth, and teachers started really thinking about different ways that they can explore these concepts. In a very creative way.
Gardens are amazing ways. In fact, I have an interview coming up with somebody who's doing work in schools using gardens.
Yeah.
So they're very powerful points of focus, and a lot of metaphors to be drawn.
Yeah, to then the notion of mathematics, where the idea of worldview, where you actually, a variable, you put different variables that give way to a certain formula. If you change those, it changes the formula. So so a teacher starts exploring the notion of our mindset. You actually, the lens through which you see things. Really interesting ways that students had an opportunity to explore beyond their subject matter, right? So this was the mandate initially also included the idea of having students do this creatively in peace weeks, and then the mayors were involved in that, so it kind of to promote, so the student becomes the teacher.
But you just had this this was all supposed to happen in a year's time.
Right.
And
Yeah. And then as the year evolved, this interaction within the school and between these schools, now you can go into this whole going into the enemy's, going to a peace event that's a joint national one that is hosted.
So the Bosniak school
and the Croat and the
would
Serb.
go with the Croat school, would go with the,
Yeah. So, but the work before that to even be able to make that trip.
Right.
So this whole process evolved in a way that actually schools that were engaged in this felt that this cannot only involve us. It has to involve other schools.
Yeah.
And in this interaction between the schools and their ministries, it was brought to the attention of these ministries that were responsible in these respective places, right? And this is how it went from this pilot into an entire discourse between the schools and their ministries, and then a discussion between all 13 ministries.
Wow.
Who with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it just goes on.
So it went right up to the top. Right up to the top, right down to the bottom, right back. So it sounded like a dialogue, on many different levels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then it meant that if you want to sustain this, the community is involved, the school is involved, the individuals and so on, but then the government, because they can backstop it. This is the point. So creating a
Wait,
collaborative.
what do you mean they can backstop it?
Because a government, in a space like this, if you don't have an ongoing collaborative partnership
Yeah.
with the authorities, every effort on this
They
end,
can kill it at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Uh-huh.
it's very
Yeah.
fragile.
Yeah.
So it needs to be owned by the structures and the institutions as well, right?
Right.
And usually what happens in these kind of spaces, and because of its fragility and things, there's a lot of distrust as well, right, to anything. So this building collaborative partnerships at all levels, in this at the so that there's an engagement at the level of the ministries. So creating a sustained consultative process with the ministries and their representatives. The international community told us that you people seem to be able to bring them together, so why don't you create an ad hoc thing that you facilitate? Because it has been impossible to bring them together by the senior folks in the international community. So this is how these kind of mechanisms started developing, that we started like working on in this work, so that it began. You had on the one hand the systems and the structures and the policies and engagement at that level, as well as these communities. So it went from like a pilot to 100 schools to 60 locations to to the ministries engaging all their advisors and inspectors, to for the first time them coming together, to this interaction,
And you were using the phrase peace building at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you see, what's interesting is that I found the interaction that I would have, the moments of interaction. At that time, I was very much deeply involved in the local community, right? And
Where were you living? Where were you living at the time?
I was living in Sarajevo.
Okay.
But then I would have moments of interaction with my colleagues in the international community. And what I found interesting was that there was such a different this feeling of enthusiasm that I felt on the ground. What I would hear around me was such pessimism around what's possible in this country.
This was in the international community?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Among, in cocktails, over cocktails and things like absolute, not only pessimism and like, oh, nothing is possible here, like you go and ha, like this discourse that clearly you basically handicap yourself. Because if that's what I get, that's where, my little, if I'm a practitioner on the ground and who I interact with is this level of interaction that doesn't in any way coach me or help me to be able to have a good probably a sane perspective to help me enter the field, it can impact me in a very negative way.
Yeah, it can be very deflating.
Extremely deflating. And then I saw a pattern that, with this kind of approach and this perspective, it impacts the way you're working with the field, right? If you're a practitioner doing that, it doesn't help,
Yeah.
And then I remember one conversation where I said, it's interesting because I wonder.
Or you have to really manage yourself,
yes,
so you don't absorb that, and
yes,
you can hold on to your own energy
Exactly. Like in coaching, you say like you're resourceful within,
Yeah.
But to do that in these climates that are so charged. You need a space as a practitioner in the field to be able to brainstorm and sometimes reflect and think through how you are feeling when you're on the ground.
Yeah,
Because
figure out, I call it juicing yourself up, somehow just getting yourself
Absolutely.
a lot more alive and like kind of watering a plant
Absolutely.
that's dry. Yeah.
And I remember saying, and then that's on one level. So you as a practitioner and your own inner filter, because it affects your filter. It affects the lens through which you see the community you're serving.
Right.
100%. And on the other side, in my mind, I was thinking, well, how come if I take one step and it's not working, what kind of reflection are we having about maybe it is what we're doing that's not working? Why is it not working? Why isn't that community or that institution or that municipality not responding to us or not willing to have a meeting with us. How come we're not creating a space where we're willing to say that maybe there's something I didn't understand?
Yeah.
Maybe the approach I took, I should have thought through this a bit differently.
It's not the clients, it's the interveners.
Right. Exactly. And for me, I said to her that this is where the spark in my mind around how, on the one hand, being in the field, but on the other, wanting to create a space with practitioners and members of the international community and allowing a conversation to unfold, where you can call it training, you can call it whatever you want, but the idea that what happens is a human being, like the people we're interacting with, are human beings, human entities. And when human beings or institutions are made up of individuals that come together, societies, communities, if you receive a response, you have to understand where they're coming from. Like, what is it that is my intention and my impact is not the same? So let's unpack that. Let's understand it, right? And let's understand that. So, for example, I remember observing a meeting where religious leaders were brought together. And I said, my gosh. And it was this like back and forth, just horror. It's terrible. And someone asked me, said, what do you think? And I said, well, you really want to know? What happened before this meeting? What kind of preparation happened with each one of these individuals that were then brought together? What kind of framing was set that allowed them to feel that it is inclusive in this collective? You suddenly brought them together in a climate that's so charged. You cannot do that. So because human beings are not machines, human beings are human beings. And especially when there's events that happen, acute events, it profoundly affects people's filters and worldviews and mindset, profoundly. So you have to allow climates to be, and the frame of engagement needs to be carefully thought through before you even open your mouth about anything that's related to the work that you want to have, the mandate you want to...
So much of the work is before you actually get anybody in the room together.
Exactly.
As we know.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is where this bridge between being in the field and then saying, okay, yeah, I really want to interact in that kind of a space as a consultant, as a trainer, as a, where let's, and because because I come from a programming angle in these kind of fragile settings, it's natural. And when I hear challenges around like even programming related challenges that facing in conflict contexts and then peace building work and how do you put all these pieces together, I get it. I understand. But then for me, I was so passionate about this aspect of accompanying and just being a little soundboard around with my colleagues, like in the international community. It evolved from these observations that I would have, in the field.
So Naghmeh, when you think about this, this whole piece of work, and I don't know when did it started in 2000 and it ended? Did it end?
2013.
Okay, so it went for 13 years. Wow, yes. It's a long piece of work. So when you think about it, like what feels to you that were the real successes of this, and what feel to you like the things that were obstacles or things that really you feel either frustrated about or that were challenges or that you'd really like to see done differently?
Yeah, I think one is that what's frustrating is that the extent...
Or maybe first talk the successes. Yeah.
I mean, the successes for me, I think that's what kept me for 13 years in being present on the ground. And of course, the 13 years I was on the ground on the one hand, and then...
So you were in Sarajevo for 13 years.
I was 8 years in Sarajevo fully. And then for the rest, I was commuting between New York, Brussels, and Sarajevo. Okay. So... because at that point, the focus changed to the government's advisors and inspectors as our teams. The teams were really from within, and no longer like my staff of 250. It kind of like it really needed to be housed at the institutional level. I think for me, really, what became a gift in terms of this initiative is that it allowed for me to be heard in terms of like, because often it's so easy to just dismiss, oh, things are not possible in these kinds of spaces. It's just not possible. Yeah, you're just like, and I remember this in the first year, at the very beginning, oh yeah, you're just like, this is just shooting stars. Like, what are you talking about? You know?
Yeah.
She's an obstructionist. She's a work criminal. He's a work criminal. He's this. So don't go to that minister, you know? So to take that.
Projections of pessimism.
Yeah. And say, I understand that, but this is the reality of transitional countries. Yes, these people are still in authority. But guess what? Behind that minister is about 80,000 children and young people that he is personally responsible with a little signature to ensure that their educational structures are shifted. You see? So if that's what it is, then I'm going to look at that role and I'm going to honor that role as a minister, and I'm going to come in with a lens that says, you want to do, what you want to do is this. You really want to do this, and I know you do, rather than you are a witch, you're an obstructionist, and then asking back to my colleague, why do you think that you never get a meeting? There's a closed door, because that if that's that's the discourse, we're not going to go anywhere. Right?
Right.
So for me, it was really a gift in that sense, because it allows it allows for there to be a discussion about, like, let's just get granular about it, you know?
To show people what's possible here.
What's possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that we can engage in a conversation, a brainstorm to understand what are the possible options that we can take, you know? And how can we begin to do that from within? Not have it be coached from outside, but let's build frameworks that help us revisit these realities as practitioners in a way that becomes where we become more resourceful, like we become more creative, right?
Was the word peace building to that community at that point a new word for them?
Say it again. Oh,
was the word peace building a new word for many of the people in the international community that you were engaging with?
Yeah. I mean, I think that even the notion, like saying peace, anything that's peace was like seemed very fluffy, you know, in that sense.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, like, right.
Yeah, you're gonna, and be like, oh yeah, so let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya kind of thing, you know, which is such a disservice to that, you know, I mean, anyways, it's fine. But this is where it was seen as a soft, and this goes back to this challenge. And this is where I wish and I hope that, and there is an emerging understanding little by little, that it is the amount of energy that I had to use to convince the ones that provided a whole sea of 13, 14, you know, countries that gave a little, you know, like a tiny speck of money.
Right.
Because they were allergic at that time to the notion of like something that's soft, right? It's process. It's not a quick fix.
Right.
If that could have, you know, if we can more quickly understand that for reconstruction, processes of reconstruction in these settings, it cannot put aside the whole human aspect of it, right? Yeah. We can, and that it all happens in a. In
fact, it is the human aspect of it
that comes first, you know. And so, and to be willing to have a coherent, strategic discussion about these things, rather than having random people like screaming it on top of their lungs and needing to just, you know, walk through to convince, you know, and then have headquarters be convinced in so many phases, you know. So
let me see, one of the things that feels like a success to you is that, first of all, that you went on for 13 years, that they stayed engaged for 13 years, that you had a voice in terms of using these kinds of approaches that were systemic, that were relational, that were not necessarily the hard stuff, but were the soft stuff. The focus was on the people and building relationships. And I don't know if there's anything more you want to, I mean, was there any kind of measurement or follow-up, or often there isn't budgets for these things, but are there any either anecdotal or kinds of assessments that showed you what kind of impact there was?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty of it was that, I mean, at that time especially, it was a lot of experimental, So yeah, we used the, various approaches to a qualitative way of trying to understand people's like experience of it and how it evolved in different phases. So we had that most significant change kind of approach, to actually with Columbia Teachers College actually did a little pilot to kind of come up with instruments to in a more quantitative way around.
Was that with
the impact.
Krister?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so and
Krister
with
Lowe,
the
yeah.
team at professors at Teachers College, they actually did a piece, in the work we were doing in Bosnia. And for
Is that something that we could post on the website? Is that available publicly, or is that something? Is that
we can see
Yeah,
we can see
okay.
what aspect of it is, and I think there's some articles that came out of that, but then also some like specific learnings around certain instruments that were kind of like that evolved and were developed in that interaction with this project. And then of course, then you had, like practically speaking, you had the concrete engagement of two communities in, let's say, when the government actually was interested in themselves being engaged, so the ministries and their pedagogical institutes. We had one city where there's actually a street and the two communities are not engaging with each other. I mean, it's actually in Mostar. I don't know if you've heard about the city. And so, and you had one pedagogical institute, like the on each side. But, I remember one of the OSCE observers for the first time looking at these two pedagogical institute advisors working together and literally bringing schools from both sides where they were facilitating, not my team. I mean, they became doing an entire workshop and training and like lesson planning. These are very they're very tangible things that you are doing in this interaction that is really shows ownership, right? Ownership at that level. But of course, for me, when you're dealing with fragile climates, it requires a long time. Like you need to accompany it for a long time. And it would be, I think, at some point for me, it would be good to be able to go back and continue a bit, the work and kind of build a momentum where
You mean now?
Now,
Yeah.
because I hear stories about them referring to the experience of Education for Peace. When you see a random person here that says, Education for Peace, yes, of course, I know about it. So it's something that was so unique in the sense that it allowed these communities and institutions to see themselves in a different light, because these mechanisms allowed them to engage in that light. But with this fragility, you have to sustain it for a very long time, and I think that it needs to continue. So
long term, not 5 years, not 10 years, but really really generations.
Exactly.
I mean, to really make something like that grow and evolve to a whole other different level of consciousness.
Exactly, especially when it's that divided, right? We have 13 ministries that don't interact with each other, right? So only when you're setting these mechanisms where they're, just to give you an example, in this one session where the authorities were standing from these different entities, one stood up and said something and the other said, I wasn't talking to you. You see, this tells you that they need a reference point to that for more than just a short amount of time.
I'm often, just when you think about the enormity of things like this, I don't know if you know the process of EMDR. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's just for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, it's a form of intervention, therapeutic intervention that deals with trauma. And, you imagine a society like Bosnia and Herzegovina that had that much trauma, finally the fighting ends. And then you can set up structures, you have your intervention that was a whole Education for Peace, but then you have people's internal psyches and all the healing that needs to go on in people's internal psyches, without which they're very likely to reproduce things, because we know that happens. Unless people actually heal things, remember things, process them, they unwittingly will reproduce something that they may not want to reproduce. So Naghmeh, okay, this is so it came education, and you called it Education for Peace. That was the name of the project. And does it still exist today?
Yeah, I mean, it's now more the institutions, so the ministries themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the name, but we need to be able to go back and literally see to what extent in those the plans that were set in that the ministerial level, how those things have evolved. Also, one of the challenges is when you have ministries change, like ministers change, and so you have to some of those things have to be maintained. So at this phase, I don't know to what extent. I know there's all these advisors that are across the country that some are not yet. They're new and they were not necessarily privy to that whole training program that their colleagues were a part of. So this is why I feel like such a thing for it to really build ground. I mean, 13 years, yes, but still, we were at a very special place at that point where.
Why did it come to an end, or why did your engagement come to an end?
So it is more like just practically speaking, the funding, to maintain things was just. It kind of became very, very difficult. So for sure, the ministries were mainly doing the work, but we were still present. So that presence means a minor presence, but still like a certain presence. And that's what I mean, like just physically being present. It really helps to kind of just build a momentum. So for sure, there's elements there, but, and I get sometimes, information about it. I got it's interesting because I got a report from a ministry about what are the elements of how they've integrated certain things in the Peace Week, and so it's interesting because I think I'm underestimating how much probably is present for sure.
Yeah. So on the one hand, I think if I were to summarize, is that this project happened. It happened over 13 years. It seemed to institutionalize something. It's not completely clear to you because you haven't been able to go back and assess, but it really did institutionalize a whole other way of thinking about integrating three very divided groups, and probably more than, but three main divided groups. And probably if you had to say your biggest frustration is the time frame, is that really these things take longer. Even 13 years, while it seems like a long time, it's really not, given the depth of what happened and the depth of how that impacts human beings and what's needed over time.
Exactly.
Does that seem like a fair summary?
Absolutely. And when we talk about peace building, if you truly want to engage in that, in an intervention, you need to see it not as an isolated thing. You need to be able to have a sustained presence, and of course accompanying institutions in even a more sustained way to do it from the ground up. So I mean, I think now for me, like I'm bringing another aspect to what I'm doing now, which I'm very excited about.
Which is that's where I was going to go next. Is what are you most excited about right now? And we are running a little bit, hitting our time boundary. But I want to hear that. Like, what's most exciting to you? Right?
For me, I think it's phenomenal that you have institutions like UNICEF that have a mechanism on the ground, sustained presence, and when we talk about peace,
what do you mean by a mechanism on the ground? What are you talking about specifically?
It's an entity that is alive, that is present, that works on an ongoing basis. UNICEF, for example, I work with. I mean, quite a lot now. This is not something that needs to be developed from the ground. It is part of a bigger, chapeau.
I noticed now that UNICEF actually is often doing things that are under the banner of peace building, and that didn't used to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, and the point here in this particular initiative that I'm very, very excited about is the idea that it's quite a mammoth undertaking.
What is this initiative, actually?
Yeah. Let me tell you about it. UNICEF is trying to position and situate peace building as an important element of the way we roll out programs. So UNICEF engages with a country, in the work, in the delivery of the social services that it does. So, for example, UNICEF works with the Ministry of Health, works with the Ministry of Education, works with various entities, structures, and so on, as well as local partners, as well as communities, to provide vaccinations, to provide water, to provide some educational resources, to provide. It goes on and on. The early child development. Just to understand the scale of its engagement on the ground.
Right, child protection.
Child protection. When you really think about it, it's quite profound. So, especially in fragile contexts and conflict contexts, that presence is key. And when it is positioned in a very special way to not only, on the one hand, not do harm by the way it does things, but also to do even more good, because it engages with individuals. They're the child, the infant, the youth, the adolescent, the caretaker, the social service provider, the communities. So it engages with these platforms that if that's the case, then while it is, so I'll give you an example. So while you provide boreholes in a community, first of all, you have to understand who is there, and what has been the conflict dynamics there. Yeah. So you ensure that you don't build this borehole in a place that's going to actually fuel more tensions, on the one hand. Right. But then maybe it can do more. Yeah. It can allow this it can build a mechanism where, with the involvement of the institutions as well as the communities, they manage the borehole together.
What is a borehole? Just so
it's like when you I wasn't going to start speaking French now. When you
it's okay. You can speak French. You can say it in French, and maybe I'll help you out here.
So it's like.
Is it for water?
Yes.
Yes, you're digging a well for water. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So while you're doing that, it's first you engage the communities in a consultative process that it's inclusive, so people take ownership of it. So they start engaging with one another from diverse communities. But then, how about you go further and have a mechanism where they are actually managing this borehole together. Where they start, building that capacity to be able to resolve certain issues that are conflict issues that happen around this.
Right. It's not a matter of simply giving a piece of technology or engaging in some kind of a specific development initiative. It's about really managing the relationships that are happening around it. Because all of those things can really either help or hinder. Depending on how they're managed. Yeah.
Precisely. So at the same time as you're delivering in an equitable way, you can build cohesive relationships. You can actually contribute to building cohesive relationships. It's this. So this we're designing this whole this particular section that you mentioned. So it's Hatis. It's designing an entire. Training kits and package and guides and with like a whole training architecture for UNICEF staff at the country office level across sectors, so that from the beginning to the end in the programming process, you are able to integrate this into your work, right?
Yeah. This is amazing, Naghmeh, and I'm sorry to actually start saying that we need to wind down, but I'm really certain that I'm going to say, can you come back another time and we'll talk more about this as a second episode, because it sounds totally interesting, and I'm sure the listeners would like to hear a whole lot more about it. So maybe as we bring this one to a close, what would be, do you have any advice for people that are interested in getting into peace building or doing this kind of work? Anything that comes to your mind that you think words of wisdom?
I think one is to come with an attitude of humble learning. That to be willing to give it a whirl. And say that, because this field has not reached perfection. it's really we're
It's really a new,
together.
don't you think of it as
Yes,
a new field? I mean, it's
exactly.
really, yeah.
So to really be kind to yourself as you engage in it, and be willing to learn on the one hand, and be willing to also explore and to experiment, and to be willing to have conversations, to not to just take something and say, okay, from like academia, it tells you something and you say, okay, so that's how I should think about it. So you listen to your inner voice, because peace building, I think, is a topic that every one of us has something to say about it, because it really touches the very heart of our humanness.
Yeah.
And so and in every one of our interactions, and every one of our moments of reflection, we are privy to an insight around peace building. And so to be willing to champion that, and share it, and really, and not be allergic to it.
Yeah. Do you think the field is growing?
Yes.
Why do you think that? Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah.
And where you see it maybe in 5-10 years? Like, what do you think is happening to this field?
Yeah, because I think that for me, I remember because like 10 years ago, I remember part of the allergy was that when you say peace building, when you say peace, is like, oh yeah, is it going to be boring because everything is dead, because there's no more creativity? And so I said, in fact, it's the contrary. It's about being willing to say that the clashing of ideas and opinions and diversity and everything are not only are really are not only they're not a threat, they're actually what we need for things to grow, and that this is and we have to be willing to explore the concepts around the notion of peace building, where I feel like 10 years ago it was a bit dismissed.
Yeah, peace building is essentially systemic mediation, and
yes.
And I don't think
Precisely.
people ever say that mediation is boring, but
exactly. Precisely.
But
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's more of a recognition, and maybe because now I'm looking at the development aspect of it, because in development work, we're starting to realize that you cannot go about just delivering things and doing things without looking at this dimension of the human interaction. Right. You have to, because you will have bottlenecks. I mean, you won't be effective in your work. So I think there's more and more of like an open space to where, in terms of where to position the whole concept of peace building. And so I think that you cannot compare really to the reaction you would have before and now. And often before it was seen as like the soldiers, like the peacekeepers, and it's that kind of, it's about security, it's about the
keeping the parties apart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's how it was viewed, and so that's that institution does it, and that's it,
Right.
And then it kind of has evolved. The discourse around it has evolved.
Right, that there's so much to do, way beyond just keeping one party on this side of the line and another party on that side of the line. There's a lot of knitting to do, knitting societies and
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it has evolved in that way.
Yeah. So. Well, listen, I was gonna ask you the vision question and the money question, but I think I'm not gonna ask those things because of the time. And you also have sort of talked about the vision, the vision question being like, is peace boring? You've mentioned a lot about that, and about how really for you there's so much to do, there's so much action that needs to happen. That there's nothing about this. That this is a very engaged concept, not a passive one in any
Precisely.
way. And one that, in terms of the money question, it needs funding and support and resources, because Lord knows, I'm always looking at the amount of money that the world economy is spending on the military. It's like trillions and trillions of dollars, and of course there's a lot of money being made, and there's always the question of can people make money? Can people make a living off of doing this kind of work? And I don't know if you have any comments about that, or what you could imagine could be possible in terms of how people can, how we could expand how people could make a living doing this kind of work. Do you have any thoughts about it, or?
Yeah, I think that one is there's I think institutions have to not put in their budgets this as a side thing. I think it needs to be, be part of the way we do things, in terms
integrated,
of like capacity,
right? Yeah, right.
Capacity
really
building around this area,
Right.
And so I think once that also happens, it's really going to help folks like us that are trying to bring, anything, in any way, contribute in any way to that. It really helps because on our end, definitely there is a struggle to in this conversation between us as consultants and our our clients, and really saying that no, this is something that you need to give weight,
right,
and not disregard and put aside and so on. Yeah, so I think that it will continue to be a struggle unless it just becomes really a part of how you build your budgets,
right,
on an ongoing basis.
This kind of systemic engagement of diverse groups that have the potential to get into conflict, and with that systemic engagement, you're preventing and helping them create much more dynamic society together. Yeah.
Precisely.
Well, listen, I'm assuming that the way that listeners can reach you is on your bio. Is that the best? Is that the best way if people want to reach out?
I think so, by email. Yeah.
Okay, and your email. Do you want to say what it is, or
sure. Should I say it's? I think it's my name pretty much. Naghmeh.Sobhani at cglobal.com.
Okay, and that will be on the website if anybody wants to reach out to you. And
Excellent.
Naghmeh, listen, thank you so much for your participation. I think there's a lot more to say, so I think you're going to have to come back and we'll do another round and maybe talk more deeply about what you've been doing for UNICEF in recent years and all of that.
But Susan, I just want to also say that I think that you have contributed so profoundly to the field, and it is really a privilege and a pleasure to have this conversation with you because I have so much respect for what you have done over the decades and decades. Really, honestly. So thank you so much for creating
Thank you for
this
saying that.
space.
That's very kind. Yeah.
Honestly.
Thank you. All right. Until we meet again.
Yes.
A bientôt.
Absolutely.
Adieu.
Ciao. Bye.
Ciao. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Peacebuilding Podcast. Check out thepeacebuildingpodcast.com for show notes and for more great information and resources. We like your feedback, comments, and suggestions. Please email them to Susan Coleman at susan@thepeacebuildingpodcast.com. And come join us again for next week's episode for more great thinking, innovations, and ideas to take our planet to the next level.